Tonight we are very, very happy to have Carol Oles with us. I've been following Carol's work for some time now, especially interested in this most recent book, her third book, called Night Watches, Inventions on the Life of Maria Mitchell. And I'm hoping that she's going to read some of that tonight because I've been steeping myself in it the past few weeks. Carol at present is the Bannister Writer-in-Residence at Sweetbriar College and is on, she's one of those enviable people who has two jobs at the same time. She's on leave from Old Dominion University. She studied writing with Anne Sexton and Maxine Kuhlman and has taught at Bread Loaf Writers Conference. If I even began to list her publications in periodicals, we would be here all evening. And I'd rather you hear from her. So I'd like you to welcome Carol Oles.
Thank you all for coming this evening. I know it must have been difficult to choose from among all the interesting things going on here tonight. I thought I would read sort of a sampler tonight, a few poems from my books, and then most of the poems that I'll read to you are from a manuscript that's not published. I'll tell you more about it when I get to it. I want to begin, since it's this reading and this series is sponsored by Friends of the Library, I want to begin with a library poem. This poem is called At Boston Public Library, and I guess I was inspired to write it after having spent several winter afternoons doing research at the Boston Public Library and becoming aware, even some 8 or 9 years ago, how many people who had no other place to go went to the library to stay warm. At Boston Public Library. In the humanities room, the windows are barred, but it's warm and dry, and the books don't edge away. Never mind if cheap wine is a flower that breathes from lapels and broken zippers are smiles. So what if this woman who finds a lost son stuck in the copier sings him a lullaby? If the captain's raincoat is 3 inches short everywhere, and he fell into sludge and forgot to wash after. If the one in the coonskin cap has misplaced his socks, the one in the wheelchair snores at the fiction. The librarian's busy. Overhead, the fluorescents say, while defeat compiles its anthologies. Welcome. Thank you for coming. This is a poem from my second book, Poery, and it's sort of an off-color poem. I better just prepare you for it. It's a poem called Spring, and one of the main characters in the poem is an endodontist. And if you're lucky in life, you don't know what an endodontist is. But for those who have reached a certain maturity, shall we say, you may have had a root canal, and the endodontist is a specialist in root canals. Spring. It begins with her fixation on the endodontist, whom she admires for his artful sublimation of the act of love. He gets rich when a woman opens wide, and he does what's good for her, rubs out necrotic tissue. Two immortal themes converge in her, pink and quivering. Such digging, such exposure, yet no pain. He gives forgetfulness. They love under lights, his eyes seeing all while hers closed. They love to music, canned and faithful, the timing always right. No disappointments, one-night stands. 3 times until she's vivid. All promises are kept. He has her on film. She has him in her mouth. Outside, the season bites down. I apologize if you're offended by that. That's my one and only spring poem. I guess as basically an urban person, or until quite recently in my life, an urban person, I don't have sort of the conventional spring poems. I'm going to read a couple of poems from the book that Karen mentioned, Night Watch's Inventions on the Life of Maria Mitchell. Before I read them, though, I have to give you a very quick course in who Maria Mitchell was, because I don't expect you to know. I didn't know before I started writing the poems. Maria Mitchell was born on Nantucket Island, which is one of the offshore islands of Massachusetts and a stronghold of the Quaker religion. And that's important in her life because the Quakers always believed in educating women the same way as men. She lived from 1818 to 1889, a long, productive life, and became famous when she discovered a comet in 1847. She'd been trained in mathematics by her father, mathematics and astronomy, because as a woman at that time, there was no university or school that she could have gone to study those things. In any case, she won a medal from the King of Denmark for her discovery, and only indirectly then, via Europe, did she become famous in her own country. She was also the first astronomy professor at Vassar College from the time of its founding, just after the Civil War until shortly before her death. I'm going to read you a poem called Miss Mitchell's Comet, which is the designation that the comet was given in the scientific literature of the day. Compare that to Halley's Comet and so on. This is Miss Mitchell's Comet. And the poem simply records her discovery. It's in her voice. It's kind of a journal of what she sees. And I need to tell you just two more things. There's a character, William Bond, mentioned in the poem. He was the head of the Harvard College Observatory at that time and a friend of Maria's father. And I have to tell you that her own observatory was on the roof of the family house in Nantucket. And that comes into the poem, too. Miss Mitchell's Comet. October 1st, 1847, 10:30. Finally, the cover has lifted. That cannot be missed at 5 degrees above Polaris, where late as Tuesday nothing was. Does sight betray? Stay calm. If it be sent to test, take the test then. No nebula could have held that place unnoticed all year. I swept over and over the quadrant. Was I a sentry whose watching grew remiss, the nebula slipping past my sight? Take notes, hand. After, let head postulate this seeming comet, new word on the slate of sky. October 2nd. The object has no train, appears more brilliant, sighted now, tracking toward the pole, a rover we cannot dismiss. Father says news should be sent to William Bond at Harvard. I dissent. What if our find comes late? The comet, an old one we have always missed. I dread error. But not to know is the germ that breeds discovery. The seer must avow the sight. October 5th. Hurtling still, in sight when it occults a star, the comet's center within a second of the star which overwhelms its brightness. I calculate the point where two celestial nobles meet, where nothing seems mistake. Once a man's voice pierced the dark. Miss, what are you doing there? He shook my sight. Spiders, ticks, even rats had visited, but no person until he made his arboreal ascent to find out what lone women do so late on rooftops with only sky for cover. Mister, with nature's consent I climb to sight to know the heavens. Later I must sleep. Here are comets to discover. For those of you who are poets yourselves, you may have recognized that that's a sestina, this arcane form that many of you probably have written. I'll read another little poem that follows that one in the book. And this is spoken by another character, a contemporary of Maria Mitchell, who was a famous botanist of the day and was also one of the directors of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Maria Mitchell was the first woman elected to the Academy, and as you can imagine, that was quite a controversial decision. The person who speaks this poem, Dr. Asa Gray, confesses to a dastardly deed he did because he was against her admission to the Academy. The poem is called Dr. Asa Gray Eats Crow. You think plants aren't hard to know? I studied them before she was born to that extraordinary man. Of course, he trained her. Chance made her look when the comet passed above Nantucket, tracking west. So she got to be first of her sex admitted to the Academy, unschooled, an insular Quaker girl. I taxonomized the nation's flora. How could I name her fellow? I didn't wait till everyone was gone to erase it and write in honorary member. It was justice. Nature hadn't made her one of us. Then came her King of Denmark's medal. She had to be called equal, even lacking parts. Writing is wonderful. It gives you a chance to get even with all sorts of people. Most of the other poems now that I'm going to read are from a manuscript called The Deed, and I'll begin with a couple of family poems. This is a poem from my daughter. To a daughter at 14, forsaking the violin. All year, Mozart went under the sea of rock-punk reggae that crashed into your room every night and wouldn't recede, however I sandbagged our shore and swore to keep the house dry. Your first violin, that half-size rented model, slipped out of tune as you played Bach by ear, Suzuki method, with 40 other virtuosos who couldn't tie their shoes. Then such progress, your own fiddle, the trellised notes you read, recitals where I sat on hard chairs. Your playing made me the kid. If I had those fingers, 5 of yours held my pinky, the world before you grew teeth. Okay, they're your fingers to paint the nails of, put rings on, hold cigarettes in, make obscene gestures or farewells with. This is a poem from my son. I wrote it when I was teaching at ODU last year. I guess it made me realize that one thing I like about teaching is that it allows me to have children all the time, over and over again. My son was a student in Leningrad. He's a Russian literature major, language and literature major, and I wrote it when he was there. It's called In My Office, I Think I See. Something inside me kicks as I watch from 4 stories up the lean boy in the parking lot, crimson knapsack strapped to his narrow shoulders, shapely dark head lowered, intent on his stride toward the gray foreign car. But he's not you. You are hypothetical across the Atlantic, behind what my generation of McCarthy-torn true believers called the Iron Curtain. Excuse me. It's thinned, become gauzy enough for light, the smell of cabbage cooking, the talk of students to seep through. 21 years ago, you slid across time, the thickest head of hair in the nursery, the largest hands, for piano, for Elise, Rachmaninoff. Your piece played yesterday on public radio. Now you ride a train sipping black tea and testing your Russian in Bulgaria. A young woman with brown eyes and a broad forehead teaches you new words. The farms pass by your window slowly. A worker looks up from his orchard to wave. I'm a capitalist investing in you as our remnant tribe plans the holidays without you, peopling with fantasy the added room, adopting in-laws, your parents reverting to their parents. We've pushed the button on our nuclear family. The fallout will be felt for generations. Now the student opens his car door, throws his pack onto the passenger seat. It's rained and the lot is studded with skies, which he breaks, turning out into traffic. There's a knock at my door. Come in, I say to the presence. Someone else's son sits down. This next is a poem from the other end of the spectrum, that is from the child's perspective, the child of an aging and infirm parent. The poem is called Day 10 After Heart Surgery, Signing a Check. Bending forward on ratchets as if she might again break open breastbone to navel, or spring the rib cage they had to saw through to make good the heart inside. My mother signs on the correct line an alien name, like hers, but with consonants doubled, M's and N's drunk on their rises, like a needle stuck, loving one note, and I don't want to hear it, but I'm afraid of picking the arm up, scratching the record. I point, fetch her other glasses, and still the letters convene too fast for her to grasp. 70 years ago in the one-room schoolhouse, she learned words, carried her name over snowdrifts, gave it shining back to her mother and father, earth-turners. Now she must sign again, I say. Banks are skeptics. My breath climbs each extra curve while we try to stay calm. For this teaching, nothing prepares me, nor for her, I'm so stupid, until here surfaces Miss Covell, who drilled me in penmanship. Slow, I say, go slow and count each hill. As alive, beside me, needing cash, my mother signs her name. Well, of course, we're all children of our parents, but we're also children of the culture, and I suppose the next poem addresses that a little bit, females in the culture from that perspective. It's a poem for my favorite doll of childhood, and the poem has an epigraph which was written by Catherine Mansfield in 1921, and the epigraph is as follows. Female dolls in their nakedness are the most female things on earth. The poem is called For Evelyn. I named you for Evelyn Keyes, who played roles like the patient wife of a San Quentin lifer, the mom of a freckle-faced boy. But my Evelyn, you would not be blonde. Your black hair was the fur of cat or sheep, or something wilder. You would not have open blue eyes. Amber, yours could close, look sideways. You were so not me, I had to love you. Still, I improved on your femininity with Windsor rose from my aunt's vanity table, painted your wooden nails and your minuscule lips, which anyway stayed shut before I glossed them tight. No, you weren't one of those criers with the tin plate in their chests that made them say, wah, or mama, which brings me to your body. Realism ended at the head and limbs. Thigh to neck, mum was the word. You were a stuffed cushion, a female thing whose linen-covered body was just more dress. No wonder you looked surprised. Where were your nipples, navel, nether lips, your buttocks and armpits. No wonder you looked into corners. Maybe that's where they hid. Evelyn, we held each other in my bed. Whoever took them might come back for more. Read a couple of poems for friends. This first one is a poem in 4 parts. And I think all I need to tell you is, well, I'll tell you 2 things about it because it helps, I think, if you're not familiar with it, to know, first of all, that it's a poem that attains its subject by a kind of indirection. I circle around the subject till late in the poem. And second, you probably know that MS is multiple sclerosis, a degenerative disease, but I'll tell you anyway. Okay. The poem is called On High Ground, River Thoughts, and each of the 4 parts has its subtitle. Part 1, How the River Came into Our House. On the dog's coat when he shook it across the kitchen floor as if it were horseflies. In the chevrons of Canada geese honking its name for their compass. In the teenagers' throats, raucous with beer and hormones as they fished off the bridge. In the icy eyes of those who had sailed it, helped by a wind they supposed never would shift. 2, a mystery of the river. One morning, as usual, you went to fetch the globe our paper boy tossed to that far border of lawn, and bending there, you saw the fish staring back, shocked as if it had been released from a high branch of the oak. The river was telling us then about things where they didn't belong. 3, how I went into the river. We had just pushed off from the dock, and the canoe seemed to be turning its ankle. I led it. I didn't struggle. I was the leg, attached, rotating, wet. My knapsack floated within reach, and our sandwiches stayed dry. Who had seen I could laugh and shiver? Nearby, a child asked, "Why did she do that?" The second time, I meant to put myself in. It was evening. We had finished the wine. Late August pasted itself on our flesh. The river was unclean, but no harm. For a second, clothed, I slid down. My white t-shirt turned tan. Brown flora tattooed my arms. I rose from the foul bath, grinning, refreshed. 4, how else the river came into our house, and another mystery of the river. No door I closed or didn't could keep that river out. A man sits close to the river, gone from him his beloved, who praised water which lifted her from herself, bore the leaden limbs that could not climb. The beast she called the MS, giving it a shape to fight. But that other was like polluted air, no escaping, except not breathe. Thus abandoned by God in sickness, and the river let her in. I am telling this because the river keeps every secret or has no memory. The man has all memory. All wounds the river suffers not open in him. It should have refused, dried up, frozen solid again that first day of spring when it saw her resolute step, her eyes focused on a point on the gray horizon where the beginning of sky fused with the end of land and the river which was letting her in, which was not a boat, not a lover or child, nor child's child. None of these was cold enough. None could carry a woman far enough from her first and last sorrows. Someone said, took her life, as if she had stolen. Someone answered, it was hers. This is a very different poem for a friend. I don't know how many of you have reconnected with friends from high school era and so on. It can be quite a memorable experience. I sort of did it indirectly with this particular friend. The poem is called Letter to a High School Friend, a Reformed Radical. When I knew him, he was a communist, and he was, one of these real radicals in the 60s, just, calling for revolution and so on. Well, I re-encountered him a few months ago in the pages of the New York Times Magazine. Totally different person. He's a pretty famous author. He co-authored the biography of the Rockefellers and the Kennedys. His name is David Horowitz, in case you know those books. Letter to a High School Friend, a Reformed Radical. In senior year, your hair revolted too. Overthrew crew cut and ducktail. Your hair wrote its private manifesto most girls gladly would have signed. There was no excess in your body. Each part accorded its ability. You didn't need great height. When you dispute, you seem to smile. Spittle oiled the corners of your mouth and kept us listening. You'd wave and pace, outmaneuver your opponent. Something was almost whispered in the corridors of learning. Something about your parents who wore space shoes and rode to Lewiston for concerts while the inquisitor accused. In the Sunday magazine now, you recant your unenlightened old beliefs. You have a pool in your backyard. You wear a tie. I bet you dine. Okay, but I'm sad how gray fur overgrows your fiery cheeks, the family chin. Time does all these terrible things, right? Well, actually, the next poem is about something good that time does. It seems to me that it takes a certain amount of time to come to a real understanding, identification, and accommodation with our parents or certain family members, and I guess that's what this poem addresses. It's a dream poem, and it's called The Interpretation of Baseball. It took time to figure out who was missing from the dream ball club that paraded through the dark in uniforms and numbers, holding up posters of the lost teammate as if campaigning for their man. I had to walk the dream railroad track again, where my son followed me at first, then took the lead, balanced, leaped forward over the ties, poof, gone. And to sit with the inquisitor who wore my dachshund around his neck like a precious fur with lacquered eyes. I had to listen then to memory, your fastball, your grand slams out of the park, and go back to the bleachers at Yankee Stadium where you took me at 7, though I was not the son whose heart that sly courser unseated him. He was the one you saved your prize for, the baseball Babe Ruth signed. You tried to show me what you saw, but I was gabbing about something else, another hot dog, how many more minutes. It took time, Father, to see you swinging, connecting. Almost all the poems that I'm going to read from now on are about some kind of connecting or other. It seems to me now everybody travels so much in the air that all human dramas, all emotion and so on, can be enacted in airplanes. And the next poem sort of addresses that. The poem is called The Gambler, and it has an epigraph just that places the context. En route via Reno, Nevada. The Gambler. Last onto the plane, now he slides to a stop in the aisle beside me, a batter reaching home. The fat woman in his window seat will have to move. then he can slip past me like water over rock. He is the color of the Mississippi and dressed all in caramel sugar. There's a neutral zone between us, but something keeps sneaking across, his big, white-hot neon smile. I saw you in the bar, he unbuttons the news. No one knows me on this plane. His smile circles. A barracuda, perhaps, but gee, I like this fish. Come with me to Reno for 2 days, he doesn't even whisper. Bring me luck at the table. And he lists what we'll do, leaving out, oh, well, that. I play it cool, smile my own circles. I'll think about it, and meanwhile, he hopes someone fine is waiting for me, a little harpoon into my flank. Of course I wouldn't, but I am thinking the kind of woman who would. His voice pours me amber whiskey. His diamonds and gold flash in the overhead reading light. He rests his hand on the velour seat between us, spreading his fingers, stretching to play a chord. The next is probably all too familiar a scene for anybody who spends any time in cities nowadays. It's called The Premonition. I am wheeling my grocery cart into the sunshine, parking it beside the trunk of my car to unload, when the crone with clipped white bristles on her chin, dirty white strands pasted to her skull, springs up before me, hunger in her outstretched palm. I taste pennies as the celery luxuriantly blooms, the animal flesh strains under its plastic tourniquet. I plunge into the night of my wallet to get the smallest bill, then make myself look at her, the white patchy nose and cheeks as if frostbite struck in the mild southern fall, the cut over one eye, the stubble that could scour a pot, the teeth a message in Morse code. What's the point, I think, when the machinery of state grinds on, she not so much as a shoe to sabotage it? Will my money pour her booze? Who wouldn't crawl into that warm, dark tunnel? Woman, am I finished with you now as I lift bag after bag into the trunk, taking care so nothing will spill or break? It's another little poem that grew out of a dream, more a nightmare than a dream. It's called The Radioactive Ball, and basically it just sets up a hypothesis that carries out through the poem. The radioactive ball. I caught it and screamed for water. Someone carried a pail. I plunged my hands in. The water boiled. I wore violet gloves beaded with glass. Now what do I do with this water? How can I pick the pail up? Where should I set it? How to turn doorknobs and enter rooms and not lift my child? Is it too late to cut them off? Where will I bury them? If I burn them, who will breathe the air of their burning? Throw them into the ozone. Ship them to Mars, these death hands. No pockets will have them. This is sort of a radioactive subject, too. We were talking at dinner about historical subjects. I guess this is a subject that was easier for me to address in a historical context than a contemporary one. It has its very, very contemporary applications. But I wrote the poem after I read a book called Wisconsin Death Trip, which some of you may be familiar with. It was published about 10 years ago. And it's a collection of photographs, newspaper excerpts, all sorts of state records from rural Wisconsin, the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. And it shows really how bleak and dreadful that life was. The poem has a long epigraph, which I'll read to you, and the poem is based on this story from those records. The daughter of Edward J. Martin, a Marinette ex-alderman, has awakened after sleeping nearly a week. During that time, her slumber was wholly unbroken, and the strongest efforts of her attendants failed to waken her. Physicians ascribe her strange condition to a sort of nervous prostration, due in a measure to the death of her mother last summer and a fright she received. She is 17 years old. The poem is called Sleeping Daughter, and it's in the voice of the daughter. And what I've done is try to imagine why she slept, basically. So it's total invention. Sleeping Daughter. With a noose around his heart, poor father wandered room to room, searching for her, an innocent man sentenced to life. I had the little ones to distract from her absence. Music had fled. Now the birds' anthems struck our ears like the schoolmaster's whip as another day dared begin. After the children had left for school, I stood at the soapstone sink and watched them get smaller, colored confetti blowing across the snow. And all at once the whole length of him was against me, pressing so hard my breath would not come, the last of it gone out on my cry. I thought I was dreaming. The snowfield erupted in black puffs as I struggled to make sense. His hands leapt like flames over parts of me no one had ever touched, not since I began to bleed. This could not be. I wanted to roll back this day like a huge boulder into the mouth of a bear's cave, wanted to undo these moments outside time. Help me, he moaned, as I turned to face him who had made me, along with the woman newly gone from us all. No, my mind shouted, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out, like the lamb last spring hanged on the barbed wire which meant to secure it. Now I saw his face, eyes rolled back, lips hanging like the idiot boy from Merrill. I saw logs float down the river, saw the men hammering fence posts, saw their 4-pound sledge open a log. I saw Mrs. Lundgren, the midwife, catching John from that swollen almond that split between mother's thighs. All this I saw in that instant when Papa clamped me as for the worst thrashing. My knees unlocked, and the kitchen rose as I sank through the floorboards, down into the dirt cellar with stored grain, rats, and in my nose held the stench of things sodden and decayed. I fell further down through the floor of that cellar as earth resumed its shape over me. I had never walked there, and the worms sang and the beetle clicked, hidden in that deeper black where I fell towards Mother. And when I stopped at the core, packed into darkness, I felt the weight of a house on my chest, heard bones splinter like teacups against a wall. I lay self-contained as a stone, mindless of day and night, until before me a silver thread shone, a snail's map, and I grasped it, pulled myself hand over slippery hand to reach the lid of earth where her voice prayed me, "Laura, climb back." Opening my eyes, I could not tell the distance of objects, nor whose bed, curtains, basin surrounded me. Who were these men, pencils in hand, writing as I blinked and moved my lips to speak, letting out a sound like a jail door opened slowly against great resistance? I could not feel where was my body. Could as easily have lifted a barn ridgepole as my arm, which drew a white line down the quilt, ended in a cluster of corn silk. Who was this man whose eyes pinned my face, whose tangled beard hung past the third button of his faded shirt? I spat my rusty word and woke again. I'm going to read two more poems. One is about technology, a new technology that at least it was new to me. Maybe some of you know that now, if you're a pregnant woman, you can actually see a videotape of your fetus on the TV screen. There's that technology. I didn't know it. I walked into somebody's house. She was pregnant. She threw this tape on, and there was her baby, which really blew my mind. Anyway, this is a poem called John Wesley Orman in Utero on VCR. A TV personality before you've breathed. On the screen, you move inside your mother, who stands entranced beside me as you trouble her amniotic sea with your leg lifts and force your preludes. Yes, we can count 5 fingers at each knobby terminus, and there, pardon us, between your legs, the little jewel bag. Oh, insatiable, you sip juice through the straw and try to stick your thumb in, too, bending your great head toward that humanity. Your whole elastic spine impels you. And next I'm shown the printout, your first baby photo, a black and white computer scan, head, tummy, back all labeled, accordion vertebrae unsqueezed. Meanwhile, your basso continuo keeps you jiving, restless as the planets in their seas of space, and like no one but John Wesley, Mama's little Argonaut, break dancer, cycling champ, reaching, always reaching out to pluck the harp, play Home, Sweet Home. I'm going to end with a poem in 3 parts based on photographs by Lewis Hine. Some of you may have seen his work. He took a lot of photographs of immigrants at Ellis Island at the beginning of the 20th century. He also, in my view, his real contribution in making photography have a social purpose was all the photographs he took of child labor, which were influential in bringing about the passage of child labor legislation at the beginning of this century. This is called Triptych 1910. So it's 3 photographs described. Each has a title, subtitle. Cannery Workers, Buffalo, New York. The fascination of beans. All eyes are on them as the women and children perch on baskets, shelling beans into barrels, into galvanized tin. On the filthy floor, children go barefoot, their toes small as beans cut from pods. Who is this visitor? 3 children dare peek. One woman's eyes raise while her head tilts efficiently down. Each second puts beans in the basket, beans on her table. And the man stands at the center in his clean white jacket, dark fedora, smoking his pipe, looking down. His hands clasped behind him. The building exposes its ribs, its high, grudging windows. Ropes and pulleys hold still. Hung in midair, a clothespin-size object on string. A bell pull to bring down the curtain. A finger chopped by the honed shelling knife, an object lesson. Close the door. Let them finish our beans. 2. Breaker Boys, Pittston, Pennsylvania. In standard peaked caps, they belong to an army that reaches the rafters. Their teachers are marking them absent. Their mothers are counting the change. On this slope, something's exploded, but no one looks up from his chute. The dust of a battlefield hangs in the air, and columns of 6-year-old boys vanish inside it, pass through the wall. Bent like musicians, all play one rumbling instrument. To strike it, their fingers must bleed, their spines curve like bent wood, seasoned 10 hours a day. The teenage conductor holds the baton, but at the backs of his players, as they pick out the pieces of stone and slate that won't burn, fire is stoked in their shoulders. They take poison each day like a tonic. They are turned from their boss, from the camera. They are no one we know. 3. Beggar, New York City. Feet cropped, she has nothing to stand on, or the pavement has turned into quicksand. Black thread in a furrow over her brows pulls them up, lifts her gaze toward a thing we can't see, or toward nothing. Her lips part, but what can she say that her form hasn't already shouted? Besides, we're not out to hear. Meanwhile, there's help from this billboard, which props her against its pocket edition safety razor, known the world over. The maker has paid it to say so. While commerce talks to her back, her eyes ask the sky. An empty delivery wagon and the head of a horse wearing blinders emerge from each side of the billboard. The horse has to wait for a driver. The beggar's hand rests like a paperweight on the blanket around her. If you or I turned the corner, the woman would show us her lifeline. And then, where would we all be? Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you agree it was well worth coming tonight to this. We are preparing for next year's season, writing the grant now. That's why David has bags under his eyes. And we are, as always, having a reception, meet the author reception after this. If you will give us just a couple minutes, hang around, and we'll put some wine and cheese and stuff out. And I'm sure Carol would be glad to talk to you or answer any of your questions. And just enjoy being here together. Thanks for coming.